Hello and welcome to Frank and Stan Chat. I think this is number 77.
Yeah,
I think it's 77. We never thought we'd get to 2, but we've got to 77, and we have got guests lined up well into April of next year. So it looks as though we might get to 100. But as you can see, we've got a guest with us today, and it's Collette Denby. Hello, Collette.
Hi. Hi, Stan. Hi, Fran.
Yeah, well, lovely to have you. Lovely to have you with us. Before Collette introduces us, so we'll just say, how are you, Stan?
Okay. Not at my very best, but I'm okay. And it's very early in the morning because I'm at a funeral shortly after this. So
yeah, well, the white shirt gives it away, Stan.
Yeah, I know. I'm not a good person to know at the moment. Everybody around me seems to be dropping.
I have to say, Stan, we've had a few of these. We normally have these about 9:30 on a Friday, but they've all been shunted around because Stan's got a funeral to get to. Anyway, Collette, thanks for joining us. Do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Collette Denby. I first got to know Frank when I was a probationary teacher, and he was my head teacher many moons ago. I have recently retired in the summer this year from headship. My most recent headship I was there 11 years, and prior to that I was a head for 6 years at a federated school, both in Liverpool. Well, all of them in Liverpool.
What part of Liverpool were they, Collette?
The Federation and the Children's Centre, so there was 3 there, was in Wavertree, and the school I've just left was in Speke. And I interestingly enough, I was the deputy there when I left Trafford in 1993. I was the deputy until 2000, and then I did a few things in between, and then I got the headship in 2004.
So how are you feeling your retirement life?
Well, I'm doing some sessional work at Liverpool John Moores University with PGCE and some Schools Direct trainees, so I'm enjoying that. It's interesting. A lot of it is remote at the moment, as you can imagine. So that's a few hours a week. I volunteer for a charity one afternoon a week, a children's charity in Chester. To be honest with you, the time goes very quickly when people say I don't know what it is. I've got grandchildren, so one of them has just started school, so I drop him off and pick him up a couple of days a week. I cycle. This time last week I was doing a jewellery workshop, so I'm keeping busy, but I'm trying to keep mentally busy as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think you were the first teacher that I appointed as a head teacher, Collette. I think you were, but yeah, I think I'm trying to remember. Yeah, anyway, many moons ago, but anyway, I learned a lot from Collette, I have to say, particularly around art and stuff like that.
How not to do things.
Yeah, and actually we were putting some displays up at home, some family photographs a couple of weeks ago, and my wife Arlene said, well, you know, how should we display this? And I always remember some of the advice you gave me about how to display, you know, so I was saying, well, do you remember Collette Denby? She used to tell me to do that. So in our living room, we have our family photographs are all displayed along the Collette Denby line. So anyway, so let's move on. So Stan, another not very quiet week in education. So of the many things you could choose, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, I know we don't necessarily want to stick with Ofsted every week, but it was while we sort of follow on from last week, and I was thinking about, you know, labels and why we use, you know, we talk about grades, but actually grades aren't the thing that schools put up on the banners and posters. It's words, it's these labels: outstanding, good, special measures, inadequate. And I just wonder, do we really need those words? Can we not describe how schools are working in a paragraph? And if the paragraph says something like the school is performing well or is underperforming, it doesn't give people a badge to stick on the wall. It describes how the school is doing. And I also think it should be a maximum rather of 3 years. That you if you do have a label, if you do have, you know, part of the problem now, and I know I don't want to go into this, is outstanding schools that have been outstanding for 13 years.
Yeah.
I don't agree that somebody should be able to say half of them will not be, because that doesn't.
I know how you could actually. I agree. I mean, I have to say, having been involved in all of this, that the big pressure in terms of grades is from the DfE. Really, yeah. I think in my time it was, because they want to have some data. You need to be able to convert this into data. And so having grades, you've got your 4 grades, so you've got data, and then you can play around with the data. But actually not giving a grade means that they can't sort of calibrate, as to whether or not things are improving or not.
Well, but they can't they, Frank? Because the data people that I've worked with before, things like Key Stage 1 results, after about 25 schools, they can predict with incredible accuracy what the national picture is going to be. So if you sort of inspect 25, 30 schools with a grading system, but that's only done for that purpose, and everybody else gets a paragraph rather than a word, I just think it would be...
That struck me. I mean, I had sections of the annual report to write for Ofsted, and I remember when I was first appointed, I said to them, well, how am I going to do this? We've got to wait until the final sort of set of school results come in. I can't remember what the end of the year month was. But the statistician said, oh, no, we know those already. So I said, how do you know those already? Well, we've done 300 schools. They're not going to change now.
No.
So in a way...
Because it's a knock-on effect, isn't it? It's the effect on the staff, the morale. It's the building up to that. I spoke to I met with a retired head teacher last week. She retired early for medical reasons a couple of years ago. Her school has always been good, and in the last inspection they got requires improvement, and she was still angry about it last week. She said, I can't, and frustrated because her illness has stopped her from fighting that corner. She's had to retire, but she said it's so unfair, and gave all the reasons why. And it's that knock-on effect, and that builds up to are we still going to be good? Well, actually, we are still good. Or it's how you verbalise it and vocalise it, isn't it? It's just wrong.
we had a head in Lancashire who was a really good head, and had led a couple of schools that were I think it would have been excellent at the time rather than outstanding, but then went into a really tough school where leadership came out as satisfactory, and his phrase was, thank you very much, you've just given me a beige cardigan to wear while I'm at this school.
Well, I still remember, I think Stan knows this school, but I had this terrible, we were asked by the DfE to take on a really, really struggling school. It really was a tough school. Numbers were down. It's a secondary school. So the trust before us had actually managed to get a senior leader from one of the highest attaining schools in the country to go there. She was a sort of national leader in education, but because she was in a school that wasn't good, she lost that.
Yeah.
She couldn't be an Ofsted inspector because she wasn't in a good school.
Nope.
So it's not just about it's and all of this is because of that grade, isn't it? So in a way, the knock-on effect, there's this thought, oh well, it's just about, we've got to be clear to parents. Well, we could argue about that, but it's the consequences for a person's career. And here is somebody who previously was thought as, she was quite young, she was ambitious, taking a real risk with her career. We shouldn't see moves to these schools as risks to your career, but that's how they're viewed because of the grading system.
Yeah.
I totted up the other night. I've actually experienced firsthand 9 Ofsted inspections.
Wow.
And 4 of them were in 2010, because that was when I moved from one school to the other as a head teacher. So earlier in the year, we'd had 2 inspections of the 2 federated schools. Because they were federated, it was 2 separate inspections. And we also had an inspection of the children's centre. Then I moved to the school I've just retired from, and we got an inspection in October. So I was connoisseur of things. I've got to say, that year, when I look back, to me, they were the most fair Ofsteds that we had. You know, because everybody seemed to be singing from the same hymn sheet. We had inspectors who would listen, who came in with an open eye, who listened to all staff. If you present it, if you said, you know, I don't think you've seen enough evidence of this, they really listened, and I think that really made the difference, because they were very consistent, those four, even though they were in four completely different settings, because two were primary schools, one was a nursery and one was a children's centre.
It's interesting because people won't know, but I think that was at the time when there was something called the local managing inspector, and a local HMI who knew the context of the schools, who was responsible for a team of inspectors. So that then, I think, led to potentially greater consistency. But I think also you get new frameworks with new chief inspectors, a bit like heads. You know, these frameworks shift very quickly into the being of the chief inspector. You know, so it's interesting. You know, you had so many in 2010. That must have been something like Christine Gilbert or Miriam Rosen.
Rings a bell. I don't know. Yeah.
Anyway, so but actually all of these frameworks, they are the thinking, you know, that because actually whatever you put forward has got to be approved by the chief inspector. Yeah. And chief inspectors are all over, you know, big changes in the framework because they are you're driving something that they want to see. So it's interesting that, you know, you should say that 2010 was in effect a vintage year from your point of view for Ofsted.
Yeah, I had a big ball patch by the end.
Stan, you going to say?
No, I was just saying they should all be consistent, though, shouldn't they?
They should.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, they should.
And I mean, people say we were really lucky. Well, it shouldn't be about being lucky, should it? It should be about we went through the inspection process like you did, and this is what we were told.
And I think it's, I mean, I like it. I mean, somebody tweeted this week and said, yeah, I had a really good experience with Ofsted. And I remember retweeting saying, well, that's what you're supposed to have. You know, It shouldn't be a big event, you know, but actually Ofsted are treating these as if they are big events, you know, so we've got senior managers in Ofsted retweeting and commenting on what in effect should be normal, you know. So it does give you a sense, though, of that they might be a little bit uneasy, a bit rattled about where they are at the moment. Anyway, let's move on, because actually that was about 13 minutes on Stan's What's Caught Your Eye. Collette, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, in light of the COP26, I actually sadly looked at the education draft strategy on sustainability and climate change. And I was reading through it, and they use words like catch-up recovery. It's part of catch-up recovery. There's a commitment to building back green, a green industrial revolution, blah, blah, blah. And there's good things in there. I'm not going to criticise that. But then on Facebook a couple of nights ago, whether you agree with Facebook or not, a friend of mine who was an ex-colleague had posted a post of Barack Obama's, and on it he was promoting my colleague's niece, who was an 11-year-old girl who was a drummer, who last year got to play with Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters because she put herself during lockdown. Absolutely fantastic. And she somehow has got with, and I'm putting my glasses on so I can read the names, Roman Morelli, who's Tom Morelli's son, who's an American musician, and they've written their own rap about what the adults should do for climate change and for sustainability. And Barack Obama is actually saying we need to listen to the children. And what struck me was we do need to listen. We need to, not just the children, the young people. If you look at COP26, the amount of young people that were involved in, you know, have gone down there, you know, they're even being interviewed on the TV, aren't they? And I don't think we need to, or the policymakers need, sorry, I don't think it's the other way around. I don't think the children and young people need to catch up. I think we and the policymakers need to catch up with the children and young people, because they've got so many ideas, you know, and okay, things might be black and white for them, and you know, but we need to listen to them more, because they're out there. That it's their future, isn't it? That's why they're so strong. You know, they think so strongly about it, because if they're promoting, you know, that schools be the panacea for this, for a change, then something's got to give. And going back to Ofsted, you know, if we're just teaching the same national curriculum, or not we anymore, but if just teaching the same national curriculum, then where is all this going to fit in? It's got to be a more open approach. So that's what's caught my eye.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you get grandchildren, and you know, our sort of nearly 10-year-old, she's 10 next month, but she'll be on this little desktop producing a PowerPoint about saving the climate, you know, saving the planet. And you know, and actually I think didn't the Secretary of State for Education making a speech at COP26, was it this week, just, you know, saying about, you know, we're going to sort of make sure that, you know, the climate and all of that is included, you know, in what children learn. I thought, wow, mate, you have missed it. You have missed it, because actually, you know, this is certainly going on in I don't know, it must be every school. I mean, in a way, it gives you a sense, doesn't it, of, you know, how far away, you know, a recently appointed, let's be honest, his recently appointed minister is from the reality of schools. And
well, he's done the forward of that. It's him who's introduced the forward of that policy. Yeah.
So obviously some advisor has written that for him, and he's put his signature at the bottom of it.
Yeah. Well, I actually Googled, you know, eco awards that schools can. There's loads of them, and then I went into some of them and the work that, you know, even okay, not everybody can win a prize for what they've done, but the ideas that are there, they're all different. And they're not hard. You know, they're not hard things, but they take time. Yeah. And it's that time, isn't it? If you're promoting this, then you've got to allow time in the curriculum, or more and more people are just going to go under.
Stan, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, 20 years, I was working out how long ago it was, at least 20 years ago, probably 25. The BBC came around to talk to film the children talking about climate and greenhouse gases and everything. And the children in that class were absolutely fantastic. And yet what they showed on the TV was almost all the outtakes. So can you tell me what green belt is? Yeah, it's a belt you put around your trousers that's green.
Yeah.
And I'd sat in there and I'd seen all these really sophisticated answers. And I was really angry with the way that it had been portrayed, that the children didn't really understand it and were making jokes about it when they really weren't.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Well,
they are sophisticated. Sorry.
No, go on. I was going to say they are, and it is time. I was saying before we were recording, you know, some of the work I do with the Northern Powers Partnership enables me to speak to, you know, business leaders across the country, and one of them, who is responsible for developing or building batteries for cars, you know, was saying, well, you know, the children come in, even with a good qualification, they haven't had enough experience of battery technology, you know, and actually that's the future. So we need a national curriculum that actually adapts quickly, so that it gives young people a chance of getting jobs in renewable energy, you know, in the future. We can't leave this until you know, a factory pops up somewhere and we think, oh, we probably need to do something about, you know, this has got to be really integrated, all of this. And sadly, you know, the fact that the national curriculum has not been revised for such a long period of time probably does suggest that, you know, we're off the pace on this.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you can remember, Frank, about I don't know whether or not it was when you were there or whether or not you'd left, and I did a part-time secondment with Trafford Authority of History. It was history and geography advisory teacher. It was only for a year, and we did a project with children to do with Trafford Park, but it was before.
I do remember that.
It was before Trafford Park. It was before what it is now. Yeah. And we worked alongside architects, landscape gardeners, environmentalists, and the plans that the group of children, okay, they're directed, but you know, they've got adults directing them, but the ideas that they came out with were just amazing. I mean, and it was published, they're published in small sort of pamphlets or booklets, but even the professionals at the time, the other professionals, not the teaching professionals, they were amazed at the sophisticated ideas and understanding that the children had. And what reading that draft strategy last weekend, I was like, you really haven't got a clue what's going on. You know,
I can remember taking a group of reception children to Marks and Spencer's as an industry day, and the manager there was really thrilled about his cardboard crushing machine. So he thought, I'll show these, so they'll love it, this huge noisy machine that crushed cardboard. And he showed it off to us all, and everybody was impressed. And then one little lad said, well, why don't you recycle it? And this manager, this was a 5-year-old saying, but why don't you recycle it?
That's a good idea.
Like, it's, again, I mean, Domo, who's now 34, and our son, I still remember he came home he was in reception, and he came home and we were chatting around dinner, and he's got 2 older sisters, one of whom I think would have been at sort of just about to go to secondary school. And he said, he talked about, he said, well, what did you do today at school? So he then went into this sort of like, and remember, he's only 5. He must have spoken for about 2 or 3 minutes about biodegradable.
Yeah.
And the 2 older girls thought, what? He's only 5. He's only 5. You know, so I mean, we underestimate, don't we, at our peril. Yeah. You know, it's not the level of work. It's just, you know, the fact that children relate to this. You know, that they see a relevance to it. So that's what excites them, because they can see, this is my future. You know, I've got to buy into this. Yeah. You know, it's not about grades or whatever, is it? It's about, this is quite interesting, you know, and it's going to affect my future. So I want to play a part in it.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, what caught my eye, I had a few things. I got my little list here. We've got to get on to, are we a corrupt society? Yeah. We've got to get down.
No. Definitely not. It's like saying, oh, yes, I did visit your house, but I didn't steal anything.
But anyway, I saw a tweet from, I'll name check it here, Karen Haller, who is the Senko at one of the Co-op academies, and she was responsible for creating a school called Frank's Place in Leeds. But she put a tweet up today which said, it was just a really saying, 9/10 of education is encouragement. And, you know, it made me really think about that. And actually, I sort of, I'm critical of our Prime Minister for being too positive, you know, at times. Everything's got to have a positive spin on it. But actually, you know, there's probably quite a strong element of truth in that, you know, because actually, I think one of the things about leadership is just lifting people up and making people feel as though they're worth something. And even at their worst time, you know, they've got to look to you as the head, you know, because if you're down, we're all stuffed, you know. So in terms of leadership, I think there is quite a lot in that.
My favourite leadership quote is, leadership is influence, nothing else.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
I think it goes on to say, if you think you lead us and nobody follows, you're just taking a walk.
Yeah, I used to have something on my wall. I just have all different quotes on the wall, but one of them was around great leaders standing on the shoulders of others. And for me as a leader, and I started to think a couple of years ago that I would retire when I was in my early 60s, that I needed to make sure that succession planning was there, you know, that you're building I was, but there was a more of a determined effort in that. But that's interesting what you say about, you know, looking at leaders building everyone up. I think what the problem is you can sometimes then neglect yourself. And I remember, and you'll remember, Frank, because that was when I got in touch with you. After the good experiences in 2010, I had a horrendous experience in 2013. I won't go into all the details of it, but we got out of a horrible situation within 17 months. So we went from grade 4 back up to grade 2. Frank was very supportive in that process. But the HMI that, I don't know if you can remember, they were called the Academy Enforcers.
Oh, yeah.
And I was terrified. And I'm not really terrified of anyone, but I was terrified. This man came I'd heard all horror stories. And it goes, at the end of the day, he said, well, Collette, I've been around your school. I've looked at your data. I've met your staff. I've met your children. And I've read the report. And they don't match up, do they? And it's just like, you just go, oh, somebody is, you know, somebody understands what we're about. And then following that, he said, I won't be coming back. You know, I know this is a good, he didn't say I know this is a good school, but I know you can get your status back. So going back to what you said, Stan, about that status. And then we had HMI, who was a good friend of yours, Frank, who was just lovely. And on the first day, he said to me, but very realistic. You know, I don't mean lovely, or even very, very astute, very realistic. At the end of this first visit, he said, right, Collette, can you tell me how are your staff so positive? He said, and I said, well, because we work as a team and we've decided, you know, if we've got to get that good status back, this is what we've got to do. And then he goes, right, okay, so who's looking after you? And I just went, No one has asked me because you're that busy doing.
Yeah.
And I don't cry usually. I do cry, but I can hold it together usually. And I just lost it. I just thought, nobody's asked me that. You know, people have come in and said, right, you know, made sure you've had your lunch, you know, brought your treats and all those sorts of things. You know, when was the last time you ate? When was the last time you drank? But actually putting it that way, and it made me really think about, actually, we do need to look at our own well-being as leaders, because otherwise we are not going to get through to we're not going to regain our status. So
yeah, I think
we've got a lot to thank him for.
I mean, you've described, though, that, haven't you, something that people that are not in education don't realize when you don't get that good grade. You know, that it's as much about a judgment about you as the leader of that school as it is about what everything else is going on in the school. You know, so it really does get very personal, and I don't mean that in a sort of aggressive way, but actually it's quite upsetting when you see somebody like yourself get a judgment which is wrong, bearing in mind that Ofsted, you know, you're just another number to Ofsted, aren't you? That school in Speak, it's been inspected, we've got a grade 4, let's move on, you know. And there isn't that sense of, well, you know, well, what's the effect of all of this? They'll say, well, you went back to good in 17 months. That's obviously driven the school forward and whatever. No, it probably was a good school. You got it wrong. And all that emotional turmoil, all of that effort, all it's done is brought us back to where we were. So we've recovered, you've damaged us, and now we've got back to where we were.
Yeah. And it was the leadership and management got a 3, and it was the patronising way in which that was delivered. It was, well, yeah, so almost like, well, you're okay, your job's safe because we've got faith in you. And I was like, I've been ahead for nearly 10 years by that point. You know, if you didn't have faith in me, then I should just pack my bags and go, or I should have packed my bags a long time ago and gone. It was a very patronising experience, and one which I have not experienced since, and hopefully never will experience again.
Well, it's funny because I have said this before, but for people who haven't heard it, but I did I interviewed Amanda Spielman, or I did a follow-up to a speech that she gave online. It must be about 6 months ago, and I asked a question which was around schools in challenging communities. You know, really it was about the fairness of the framework. That actually, if you've got a framework which all it's doing is identifying schools in challenging communities, it's probably saying that the schools in challenging communities probably need a little bit more than you're giving them, you know, because if it's all you're going to do, we could probably do that now. We'd stop the inspections. Let's just, if you want 10% of the schools not to be good, we can probably give them to you because they're probably in the 10 most challenging communities in the country. But she said, well, no, we get around that because even though the overall effectiveness grade might be, RI, we give leadership good as a way of saying that there's sort of like capacity or whatever. And actually, I still to this day regret not following up on that. I had 2 questions and I had a second question, which I knew the Northern Powerhouse Partnership wanted asking. But basically, this is about fairness, isn't it? This is about equity. So actually, the framework is not adaptive enough to be able to take into account the fantastic work that's going on in some of the most challenging communities.
Yeah,
it's just not. It's inflexible, and inspectors are not experienced enough in those communities to be able to judge them. That's the thing that does my head in. Whenever I go and see a group of inspectors inspecting some of the toughest communities, bearing in mind, you can't be an inspector if you're not in a good school.
well,
So, chances are you've got a higher chance of head teachers coming from areas that are not in the most challenging communities. And you look at them and you think, you've never done it here. You've never, ever done it here. I could put you here and you'd last a couple of weeks. And here you are telling people who are embedded in that community that they are not doing a good job. And I've had that happen to me personally on 3 occasions, or 4 occasions, 1 primary and 1 secondary. And you think, no, I'm not standing for this anymore. That's what my thing with Ofsted is. It's a personal thing, that you haven't got inspectors who know how to inspect some of the most challenging communities, schools in some of the most disadvantaged communities in the country. You haven't got them. You have got HMI, who have probably got a broader range of experience, but even then, they're not coming from the senior echelons anymore of schools because the salary is nowhere near good enough.
No.
It's
interesting what you were saying earlier about people being stripped of their NLE, and because I was an LLE and I was stripped of that in 2013. My chair of governors was a national leader of governance. She was stripped of that. We weren't allowed to have students in.
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
It was so anything they can hit you with, they hit you with.
Yeah.
And that's what it felt like. That's what it felt like for those 17 months that you were just being battered. Because you've got to remember that this is what I know what we got in Ofsted. I'm telling you now, it's not fair, and we're going to prove that. I mean, bearing in mind the area where we were above the national at the end of Key Stage 2. In all areas, and you just. No. But it was, going back to what you said before, it was a different framework that had come out in the September, and they were just looking at Key Stage 1, and they wouldn't listen to how, and it was about how children develop, isn't it?
It's a sausage making machine, isn't it? You've got to look at
that learning process. This is how children develop. They don't all develop at the same rate, and unfortunately, a lot of children come with very little experience. It's that you're building those building blocks at a lot later stage than a lot of other children might have had. So yes, they are going to achieve at those national levels at a later date. So anyway, I'm getting very personal.
And you were going to say something then, I think.
I can't remember what I was going to say. I told you I wasn't on form today.
Should we quickly move on then, Steph?
Yeah, move on.
I know we're close on about 35 minutes, but what did you think about We Are Not Corrupt?
You don't need to say it, do
you? You probably never watched the programme called The League of Gentlemen. But it was a really dark comedy where they had got rid of some students, and the police came to check, and the owner of the shop said, first thing she said was, "We didn't burn them." I thought that was just what Boris Johnson was like.
Yeah,
we're not corrupt at all.
I think what's interesting, because I've seen some images here. I don't know who he said that to. Who was? I mean, how many people were in the hall when he spoke? Because actually, you never see that. But there were a couple of images where I think it was the Guardian or somebody said, I think it was. I'm trying to remember who it was. It may have actually been Boris Johnson, one of Boris Johnson's speeches. But when they pan round, there was virtually nobody in the hall. So the initial speech, the David Attenborough and all of that, it was packed and you could see those. But but when there doesn't appear to be many people in the hall, they don't show you that sort of broad picture. It's just the face or the image of the person who's speaking. But it was terrible.
Why would you say it? You don't.
But are we? I mean, are we blind to the fact that there's quite a lot of corruption going on? I mean, was it the Nigerian foreign minister who was saying that London, thieves steal overseas and they store it in London? That's basically what he was saying, and you think, well, perhaps we don't know this. Perhaps this is something that's going on. Perhaps this is, we think that we live in a society which is not corrupt, but perhaps, I mean, some of these stories that are coming out at the moment, do start to begin to challenge your view, your inward-looking view of how great Britain really is, and how it's viewed overseas. I think it's, it's interesting when I've started to pick up on American newspapers and Australian newspapers to get a feel for, well, what are they saying about us? Well, it's not a good place to look. If you want to be encouraging and positive, don't go to some of the overseas newspapers to think what they think of Great Britain at the moment.
No, it is. It's very scary, but it almost feels as though, I just don't feel as though people are honest. If you've made a mistake, tell us you've made a mistake. Move on from it. But no one ever apologises. It's always, how can we get? It's a bit like dealing with child in school, isn't it? The children who say, "Did you do it?" "Yeah, miss, sorry." And others who will go all around houses and it'll take you all day to find out what the actual truth was. But actually, you could have just told you in the first place. And it feels a bit like that, doesn't it? They're just not going to own up to making a mistake.
Yeah.
They're almost untouchable. Well, they think they are. Yeah.
It's that doubling down when you openly expose somebody, and they do a technique called bridging. It's called in when you're dealing with the media. You tell them, "Oh yeah, that was a really good question, but the important point is
the truth of the matter."
Yeah, that's when you say what you wanted to say all along. And the people are more interested in X than your question.
Yeah.
Anything to bridge away from what I want to. From what you're asking me to what I want to say.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're nearly at 40 minutes, folks. It just rocks by, doesn't it? So, but anyway, Collette, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed it.
It's gone very quickly. I'm going to have a breakfast now.
And we've got, as I say, between now and Christmas, we've got guests each week lined up, and some of them are return guests as well. So, and also I think we've got a CEO coming up, quite a high profile CEO as well, chatting to us in the next week or so. But Collette, it's been a pleasure having you on. And
thank you, I've enjoyed it.
Thanks, Dan. I hope everything goes all right today. And
All
of those sad things, but it's life, isn't it? Or not life, death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll see you all, hopefully all being well, at the 78th edition of the Frankenstein Chat next week. So
thanks very much.
No, thank you, everybody. Thank you.